Amanda here, and today we're talking about this Hourglass cheek palette. This is part of their holiday release this year. This is the Ambient Lighting Edit Sculpture palette. I purchased mine from Sephora and it was $80 US. $80. Okay. It's a little stressful even saying that. Why did I spend $80 on this palette that is literally smaller than my phone? Well, I'll tell you why. I purchased this sculpture palette because last year's holiday palette, this is the Ambient Lighting Edit Ghost Unlocked palette. This is one of the best palettes that I've ever owned. And I don't know if you could tell, I have a lot of makeup, I have a lot of palettes, and I have never so deeply loved a face palette and so consistently used a face palette as this one. I know that that sounds really intense, and let me tell you, it is. I also know that this looks virtually untouched just because of the shape of these pans. I can't even explain to you how much these actually are flattened out compared to how rounded they were when I first got this. Basically, long story short, I love this palette. I use every single powder in here. I use this setting powder to set my whole face, and then I use this other setting powder mixed with the bronzer to bronze my face. I will use one or both blushes, and I love this highlighter. It is stunning. It is shimmery. It's gorgeous. I love it. I love this palette. I've tried other things from Hourglass here and there, but not a ton. Not a ton of their products really have appealed to me, but because I was so passionate about that cheek palette, as you just saw, a little overboard maybe, I don't know. I knew that I really wanted to get this year's palette, and you know, I didn't want to miss the chance to be that excited about a palette again. We're just gonna have to find out if I love this sculpture palette as much as I love the Ghost Unlocked palette. Before we get into my opinions and whether or not I am as passionately in love with this palette as I wanted to be or not, let's just get some of the info out of the way. First, we take a close-up look and see that this is a very shiny, metallic looking plastic packaging that gets super dirty, which it is what it is. It does have a locking glass closure, and it has a nice size mirror in here. And then looking inside, we have 6 face powders here. 3 of these are existing shades, and then 3 of them are new powders for this palette. So we have the dim light finishing powder, diffused light finishing powder, glistening strobe light strobe powder. This is one of the new shades. Another new shade is the bronzer. This is Natural Bronze Light. Then the third and final new shade is a strobe blush called Vibrant Flush. And lastly, one of their really well-known blushes is called Mood Exposure. This was another draw for me because I've really wanted this blush for a while. So those are the 6 shades in here. Before I get into comparing this with last year's palette, I want to show you the swatches of all 6 of these powders first. The 2 setting powders are kind of difficult to see on my arm, which is technically a good thing because you want setting powders to blend in with your skin. So you can see here that the bronzer and blushes have a decent pigmentation to them. The bronzer has the most opacity for sure, and unfortunately the strobe powder, the glistening strobe light, which is supposed to be the highlighter, also does just about as much blending in with my skin as the setting powders. You will see that kind of holding true when I show you my application demo. So now that you've seen these shades swatched, let's take a look at me using this palette on my face. I do use 5 out of the 6 shades in the palette, and then we'll get into the price breakdown and the comparisons. I'm starting off with the diffused light powder to set my concealer. I just put a little under one under eye to see if I could tell any difference, and for this powder, it didn't look too much different. I just set everywhere that I put concealer, so sort of the center of my face. Then I used dim light to set the rest of my face. With this one, I could see a bit more difference, so I just did one side and then compared. You can tell it took a little bit of the shine away, but it's still a really nice finish. It's not too matte for me. I like a more natural finish on the face. I feel that one setting powder is more than enough in one cheek palette. Next, we're going to the bronzer. I'm using Natural Bronze Light and just sweeping that along my cheekbones and also warming up the face a little bit more around my forehead. For me, this bronzer is the highest performing product in this cheek palette, and I was really happy with the shade and the formula on the bronzer. Next, I'm using Glistening Strobe Light, and I applied a little bit of that to the top of my cheekbones, and it basically didn't really look like there was much going on there. So I just started piling it on as much as I could, trying to get some sort of shimmery shininess. There's no glistening or strobe lighting to be found with this powder, at least in my opinion. It's just not really doing much no matter how much I apply, and I felt just a little disappointed with this one. Now for the blush, I'm using Mood Exposure. I've wanted this blush for a while, so I am glad that this is in the palette. And I do think this is a really nice, lovely, kind of mauve-y toned blush. So also happy with that. Overall, I think that it looks nice. I was just hoping for a little bit more excitement, a little bit more from that highlighter really would have gone a long way for me. Okay, math is not my strong suit, so hopefully I did not really drop the ball on these numbers, but I did a price breakdown. I've done this a few times for other cheek palettes, especially the NARS ones, because the NARS cheek palettes are such a good value that I was kind of hoping that the Hourglass cheek palettes would be the same. Spoiler alert, they are not. The value is actually pretty dismal. So let's get to the breakdown. This palette is retail priced at $80 US. It contains 6 powders, and each one of the powders is 1.4 grams each. So the entire palette has 8.4 grams of product. $80 divided by 8.4 grams gives us a price of $9.52 per gram. That's pretty freaking expensive. So when I'm determining the actual value, I go look at each individual product in here. So their finishing powders, their blushes, bronzers, and the strobe powders, and get a price per gram breakdown of the full size powders in each one of those categories. So the finishing powders are $48. They have 10 grams a piece, which means that the price per gram of the individual full-size finishing powders is $4.80 per gram. The blushes are the high dollar item for sure. The full-size Hourglass blushes are 4.25 grams, and they are $40, which means they are $9.41 per gram for the blushes. The bronzers are priced at $52, and those are 11 grams a piece, which means the price per gram for the Hourglass full-size bronzers are $4.73 per gram. Lastly, the strobe powders, full size, are 4.53 grams each. They are priced at $40, which means that their price per gram is $8.83. Now, why did I tell you all of that? Why did I throw all those numbers at you? I'm going to tell you. I take the price per gram for the individual powders and I multiply them by the number of grams of each one of those products present in this palette. There are 2 finishing powders in here, which means there's 2.8 grams of finishing powder. Multiply that by the $4.80 per gram that we got from our earlier equation, and that means that there's $13.44 worth of finishing powder in this palette. So I'm just going to show you my math on the screen here so that I'm not continually reading numbers, because I just did so much of that and I don't really think it's that entertaining. You probably don't either, but I do want to show you the process and the work behind what I'm talking about when I tell you that this palette is not a good value. So you can see here when you see all of my work that the total value of product in this palette is $58.77, which means I paid well over $20 for this plastic outer packaging. It is beautiful. I'm not gonna pretend like I don't like it. It's really pretty, but I don't want to pay $21 for this packaging. Now, I know that if I went and individually purchased all of these powders, it would be more than $80, and I know that 3 of these technically aren't available individually. You know, I understand the convenience. There are so many factors that go into a product like this. I'm not saying that this palette should have been priced at $58 or whatever it was. I understand that there are a lot of variables, but when you look at the actual per gram value and combine that with a lackluster performance of the product, that's when it feels like not a good value. Because I paid $80 for this palette and I have loved it. I'll probably be able to use this for another year or 2 before I even start to hit pan on these powders. Every single one performs well for me, and that is well worth the price that I paid for this palette. But because some of these shades are just really lackluster in performance, especially compared to last year's palette, that's when it really just feels not worth it to me. You can definitely tell in the swatches comparing this year's palette to last year's palette that the shades are kind of all over the place. The setting powders are neither here nor there. The highlighter is basically non-existent. The bronzer and the 2 blushes are nice, but even when you look at the swatches of these 2 blushes versus the 2 blushes from last year, you can tell they're just not as opaque. They're a little bit more patchy. The consistency just really isn't there. And it feels like quite a letdown for me coming off of loving last year's palette so much. And this year's palette just felt really lackluster, really inconsistent formula-wise, performance-wise. I'm sure you could tell between the swatches and the application demo. This just wasn't doing a ton for me. The setting powders are neither here nor there. I know that the Hourglass setting powders get a ton of hype. I don't think they're bad. I just don't necessarily think they live up to the hype. I have other setting powders that I much prefer over these that were definitely less expensive. The strobe powder, the highlighter in here, is by far the most disappointing. It just barely shows up, and I like a soft, ethereal, kind of natural glow highlighter for sure. I don't mind that at all. I'm not somebody that wants a crazy, intense, metallic, sweaty highlighter all the time, but I feel like you can barely even tell that this powder is on my face, and I was piling it on. The bronzer I honestly think is really nice. The blushes are okay, but they're just not quite as good as last year's blushes. I don't have too much to gripe about, but I do find Vibrant Flush to be a little bit patchy. But overall, the blushes are nice. The bronzer is by far the best powder in this palette. I just feel extremely let down by the top row in here, and that's half the palette. Ugh, I just wanted you to be good. Overall, I just can't really recommend this year's palette. I'm not giving up on Hourglass. I have absolutely no ill will towards the brand. I still love last year's palette. I still will use it and cherish it, and I will still hold on to hope that next year's palette will be better. I'm not writing off Hourglass as a whole, but I am not very happy with my Sculpture palette, unfortunately. I know that they also have a 4-pan palette. I may look into that one and see which shades are in there, what kind of powders are in there. Perhaps I could have better luck with that one. Now's the time when I want to hear what you think about this palette. Have you tried it and had a great experience with it? Have you tried the 4-pan palette version? I would love to hear your thoughts. I always love to hear what you think about things too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye. I don't love it as much. I really, really don't. Let's make sure I got this right before I sound like an idiot. So that means, so the, so all, oh, excuse me, not very ladylike. Why? Why can't you just be good? Just wanted you to be good. Sorry, I'll try not to yell at my palettes. It's so upset. Overall, I cannot, what was I talking about? Okay, my foot's falling asleep. All right, I'm fine. I'm doing great. And now's the time, just gotta get the weirds out sometimes. Shake it out, you know? Maybe you don't know. Maybe that's a really weird thing to say. Sorry. This is where it lives, right in my reach, because I use it so much. You want to see how much better that one is? Hold on, I'll show you. Look at this. Just look. I'm going to use the highlighter from last year's palette. Same brush. You see that? Do you see that? It's still a soft glow, but it's actually there. So much better. So much better. Ugh. Much better. Okay, well, I've been being weird and rambling and yeah, just my usual MO for a while now. So thank you for watching. Have a great day. Make sure you register to vote, wear your mask, wash your hands. I love your face so much. I'll see you in my next video.